All right, so at some point in your project, your clay is going to get too dry to work well. And you're going to wish your clay was softer and nicer. And now you're getting a little older. So instead of bringing your dry clay to the teacher and saying, "Teacher, my clay's too dry. Can I change it for some wetter?" No, I'm sorry. You don't talk like that. Anyway, you're going to be able to make your clay recycled, re-wetted, in good condition all by yourself. I think you'll like it. Some people are like, "Oh, I can't do it." Trust me, you can do it. So, got some clay, dry it out. First thing you want to do is make it into small chunks. The reason you want your clay in small chunks is because it increases the surface area, the amount of outside surface for the volume of clay. If we're going to spray this, it's a fairly big chunk of clay, but only the outside would get wet. All of the inside would stay dry. So you can either tear off little chunks like this, which is fine, and if you only have a little bit of clay to do, I would do that. But if you have a lot of clay that you need to recycle, because a lot of it's too dry, I recommend flatten it down on one of these boards and take one of the needle tools and kind of cut it into, like dice it, I guess you should say, like diced ham. Go one way, go the other direction. Be careful not to cut yourself. You might be thinking, "Oh, that's dumb. Why would I cut myself?" I actually did it just earlier today because I was going too fast and I went and I right in my finger. That wasn't very fun. So just be careful not to do it and you'll be fine. So we've got this all cut up. Then take your little chunks. Just think how much surface area there is now. Every one of these has a lot more surface showing for the amount of clay that's inside. You're going to tear it into little chunks and make the chunks into kind of a pile. A little clay mountain, if you will, of chunks. This can take a little while. Let's talk while we're doing this. The wetter your clay is, like the least dry, then you can go bigger chunks. The more dried out your clay is to begin with, the smaller the chunks you need to make. So if you have really, really dry clay, you could make your chunks even like a quarter the size, like this big, all right? The drier the clay, the smaller the chunks. That just makes sense because then every time you make the chunk smaller, it's going to have more surface area to get wet compared to the volume that the clay is. By volume, I mean the amount, the mass. I know mass and volume aren't necessarily the same. Science people, thank you. Right, but I'm talking about the volume, the chunk, the heaviness of it, the massiveness of it. I'm still saying the same thing. I'm getting there, people. Takes a little while. This clay wasn't really that dry to begin with, so it's kind of sticking. I had already recycled most of my clay before I did this, and I didn't have dry clay. And it was really hard philosophically for me to sit there and make clay really dry on purpose just so I could recycle it. You'll notice this takes a while. Those of you who will come up to me and say, "I can't get my clay to be wet again," did you actually break it into plenty of small chunks, or did you just make it into 2 or 3 big chunks and call it good? It takes a while to do a good job. All right, so I've got my clay into small chunks. I'm going to take my squirt bottle, and I would squirt it quite a bit. Squirt, 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 and by quite a bit, for a pile this big, here's my hand by comparison, easily 20 sprays, easily. The drier the clay, we already talked about the smaller the chunks need to be, but also the drier the clay, the more spraying you need to put on it. kind of stir it around a little. Don't smash them together. You don't want to create one big chunk again, because then you defeat the purpose of breaking it into small bits. But try to get all of it coated with some nice water, and then you gotta let it set for a minute or two. And by a minute or two, I mean literally probably about 3 to 5 minutes. Again, the drier the clay is, obviously we already said the smaller the chunks need to be. The drier the clay is, the more water you spray on it, and the drier the clay is, the longer you let that water kind of soak in, all right? So maybe close to 7-8 minutes if it's really dry. And you might spray it multiple times while you're waiting. This clay, like I said, wasn't that dry to begin with, so I'm gonna call this good. Some people at this point, when it's time to smush this all back together and make it into nice clay, they just smush it once into a clump, and then they kind of rub the surface to make it look like it's all just one piece. This is not recycled clay. This is a bunch of wet chunks smushed together. It's still slimy on some spots and dry and chunky in other spots. To get it to mix together nice and evenly, it's called squish and fold, all right? So it's squish and then fold. And sometimes it sticks. That'll happen. Fold it and squish it and fold it and squish it. Squish it and fold it. You're gonna come up to me and say, Miss Riemersma, should I squish and fold this? Yes, you should. Fold and squish. That gets that moisture that was on the outside of all those chunks mixed throughout the actual clay itself instead of just sitting there. It's getting close. See, now if I tear this apart, look, it's beautiful. No chunks, all nice and even. Look at that, that's some sweet clay, nice and soft, ready to use. Anytime your clay gets too dry, just get it into chunks, spray it down, let the water soak in, smush and fold, and then you'll have some nice recycled clay ready for you to use. Have a great rest of your project. I'm out.